Excited to have Gwen Weerts visit us from SPIE, which, as many of you know, hosts one of the major contributions for our field is hosting Photonics West Conference every January. And in recent times, it's been in San Francisco, and it's pretty much the main conference for the field of biomedical optics. And so we're really thrilled. And of course, associated with that, they have two major journals now that serve our community. One is the Journal of Biomedical Optics, which has been longstanding in the field now, I would say, 25 years,
Yep.
Right? It started in the late 90s, if I remember correctly.
I think it's actually up to 30 now.
Yeah. And more recently, a new journal called Biophotonics Discovery, which really focuses on the translation and utility of optics in medicine. And so that's a really exciting development. But let me give a formal introduction for Gwen, so you get a sense of her background. So Gwen is an active professional, really active in scholarly publishing and science communication, and specifically in the broad overall field of optics and photonics. She serves as the journal manager for all of SPIE's journal portfolio, and she serves as editor-in-chief for Photonics Focus, which is SPIE's journal that kind of introduces the latest developments of optics and photonics to a more general audience.
It's a magazine. You can think of it as we think of it as like Scientific American for people working in optics and photonics.
Sure. So Gwen's been with SPIE for, you said, 17 years now, right?
Yeah.
And is really focused on promoting and strengthening SPIE's journals program. She leads the editorial board meetings, I think, for all the journals.
Yep.
And coordinates, I imagine, with the editorial boards of all of those journals to really, supercharge content and try to figure out what we can do differently to, draw more attention to the great work that academics and industrial scientists are doing in the field. And so she really promotes the journal content through social media and press releases. And I think professionally, she also takes a big role in scholarly publishing generally. She's a member of the Society for Scholarly Publishing and the National Association of Science Writers, because she is a science nerd, I think.
At heart, yeah.
So, I'm really excited to have her. She's going to give two presentations today, the first of which will give you an introduction to scholarly publishing. So let's welcome Gwen.
Thank you, guys. I am used to pacing when I talk, and there's this cable here. So if I face plant, it's fine. We'll just move on. It could happen. Yeah, I have one. I have it here. Yeah. But then I also have to be able to see my notes. So, it's a tricky arrangement here. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about scholarly publishing, which is really the formal dissemination of scientific work. And then this afternoon, I'll talk to you about some different things that'll get more into science communication. So it would help me to get a better sense of who is in the room. I think we have a few people. We have mostly PhD students, a couple postdocs. So if you are in industry or expecting to go into a career in industry, maybe you could raise your hand and let me know. Okay. If you are hoping for a career in academia, raise your hand. Interesting. If you really don't know and you'll take whatever job you're offered, raise your hand. Okay, good. Yeah.
But one, for your information, we have two people who are here from industry.
I saw that on the
The rest are from academic.
Okay, interesting. Good. So especially those of you who are in industry, I'm actually curious sort of how this talk sits with you and how relevant you find it, because publishing when you work in industry is really a different animal than publishing when you work in academia. Also, I'll be talking to you for 90 minutes now and then 90 minutes later. So please just raise your hand, ask questions, participate. This will be a lot more interesting for you and for me if you are involved. So do not be shy. Please talk whenever you want to. Hassan did a great job of introducing me. I'm Gwen Weerts. I do work with a lot of different editors. I know Bernard and Hassan through the Journal of Biomedical Optics, and I work with about 600 different researchers across our editorial boards, across all areas of optics and photonics. Biophotonics is definitely one of the most exciting and interesting areas of optics and photonics. So I love working with those journals. So I am from SPIE. We're up in Bellingham, Washington, beautiful Pacific Northwest. It's about 1,200 miles north of here. And yeah, I've been there for a long time. So how many of you have published a paper, a scientific journal paper? Not proceedings, but journal, peer-reviewed journal paper. Okay. Good. Okay, so about half. Has anybody published more than one? Nice. Okay, good. So jump in with your experiences. I'd love to hear you contribute to this. This is a brief outline of what we're going to go over. We'll talk about an overview of journal publishing, how to choose the right journal to publish in, things that you should know before you submit, the process of scholarly publishing, what's actually happening behind the scenes, the who does what, and then what to do after you get accepted. And then part two, we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about ethics and scholarly publishing, which is a really growing and important thing. Oh, I did skip right over my quotes. I had some really fun ones in here. Yeah. True. Yeah, what was the other one? It was, oh yeah, a drug is a substance which, if injected into a rabbit, produces a paper. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we have 15 peer-reviewed journals that cover all of these different topics. So I think all of you are in this area, but SPIE also covers remote sensing and nanophotonics and telescope instrumentation and photovoltaics and laser physics and increasingly quantum optics. So it's really broad. And I did have a quiz question to find out if anybody knew one of the SPIE journals, but Vasan already, it's all right. Killed that one, but that's totally fine. Neurophotonics, that's true. Yeah. Is anybody working in neurophotonics in here? More brain specific, Bernard? Okay. So there is our full portfolio. Okay. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about the three different main types of research output. I think everybody's probably clear on these, but we are mostly talking about this one here today, journal articles. But proceedings are what happens at a conference. They are what proceeds to take place at an academic conference. They're a written record of that. They tend to be a really current snapshot of a research project that is not yet complete. A preprint is usually a more complete article that is not yet published or submitted to a peer-reviewed journal. It is possible for all three of these, for the same research project to exist in all three of these forms without it being a violation or a duplicate publication. So it's very normal to present a piece of research at a conference and then to turn that into an article that's posted out in preprint and then to submit that preprint to a journal. Any reputable journal will be okay with that process, but I think that there is some confusion about, well, if I write a proceedings paper, maybe I can't submit that to a journal. That's not true. So just to be clear about that. So when it comes to choosing the right journal, for those of you who have published a paper, I am curious how you chose which journal to submit to. You raised your hand and said you published. How did you choose?
Yeah, I guess like thinking about the audience of the journal is one, and then like reputation of the journal. For like
yeah. Yeah. Did you have free reign to where you submitted to? Yeah. Yeah. Who else in their papers? You said you'd published, right?
Yeah, I was in a similar situation. I was an undergrad, so I had much less say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I think like my paper, and then like my paper was kind of like a directive on the two sides. So like that's like a big reason for publish those.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think for most cases, your first paper is wherever your mentor tells you to submit. That's kind of the typical course, and maybe the next couple of papers as well. But soon as you grow in your career, you'll have more autonomy and you'll start making this decision for yourself. So the things you need to look into are the journal scope, probably one of the most important things. Spend some time on that journal's website, read through the scope of the journal. Consider if it sounds like your research is a good fit for that journal. Look where other researchers in your field are publishing. If Bernard and Vasan are publishing in that journal, it's probably a good fit for you. If your mentor is publishing in that journal, it's probably a good fit for you. So take a look at other people publishing there. Also take a look at the editorial board. See who's serving on the editorial board. If you know those names, that's a really good sign. And then consider, is my work within the cohort of this journal? So as you're scanning paper titles and reading abstracts, think, do I belong in this community? And if the answer is yes, then that's a good sign. But also you have to consider availability. So open access, I'll talk about in a little bit in more detail, but open access work research is much more broadly disseminated than work that is under access control. So if you're publishing in a journal that is under access control, then you have to consider whether that publisher has a wide subscriber base. Will people be able to actually get your paper? Again, consider if it's open access, and if it is open access, what's the cost to publish? The cost to publish in open access journals varies between $1,500 and, I don't know, what's Nature now, like 18,000? Yeah, crazy. It's a lot. So huge variance in the cost for open access. And then you also have to know your funder and your institution's mandates. Some of them will require open access publication. Some will allow closed access publication, but require depositing your paper on a repository. So you just have to kind of know what's expected of you. That's your background research. And then reputation of the publisher. Who is the publisher? This, I think, matters more than it used to. There are two kinds of publishers. There's not-for-profit and there are for-profit publishers. Not-for-profits are society publishers like SPIE, Optica, IEEE. When you're a nonprofit publisher, that means that any revenue that's generated from subscriptions or from open access fees goes back into the community. So it goes back to the community as grants, as travel funding, as chair endowments, all sorts of ways that if there's ever any excess money at SPIE, it gets sent back to the community. And that makes a big difference when it comes to publishing, because if you are a for-profit publisher, which are Elsevier, Springer Nature, Wiley, MDPI, Frontiers, any excess revenue that's generated from publications goes to shareholders or to private investments. And that means, and this is the key bit, profit margins drive decision making. And so there is a financial incentive for a commercial publisher to publish more papers. And that incentive does not exist with not-for-profits. So this is increasingly important, way more than it was 10 years ago, because of the emergence of some big publishers like MDPI and Frontiers, who are really profit-driven, are publishing large quantities of research, and are not particularly concerned about the quality of the research they're publishing. So I compare this decision about where to publish is like the shop local movement that really gained steam about 10 years ago, that when you choose where to publish, you're choosing where to spend your money and how that money gets redistributed. So I really encourage you to consider shopping local when it comes to publishing. Okay, and then also you have to consider, does the journal clearly describe their peer review process and editorial policies? That information should be really clear on the website. If it's not, that's a cause for alarm. If a journal is obfuscating that information at all, that's a worry. Also, make sure that the journal is indexed in the major indexing databases. The primary ones you should look for are Scopus and Web of Science. It is worth noting that not all journals, especially new ones, are indexed immediately in those databases, but within 3 years, they all should be. And then also you have to look into what is the journal's impact factor and site score. How many people think they've got a good handle on what impact factor means? Yeah, what do you?
Isn't that like how many people share the journal? How much visibility they can get?
In a general sense, that is true. Yeah. Yes, that is true. Does anybody have any other more specific? If you're going into academia, this number will start to mean a lot to you. Okay, so impact factor. It is actually a formula. Oh, yeah.
Moving ahead, Gwen.
Yeah.
Can you go back to your
Sure.
previous slide? I have a question about the journal index.
Yeah.
Because those are run by, I think, for-profit
They
companies.
are.
So I'm just curious about the interaction between publishers and these indexing outfits.
Oh, gosh.
What are, maybe that's a whole other
It's a
talk.
big question.
Right. I mean, right. What are the factors? Because they are profit driven.
They are.
And so the question is that, yeah, what is that interplay? Or is
Yeah.
that something that's not relevant necessarily for this discussion?
It won't impact all of you a lot. I would say that, so impact factor is owned by the Web of Science brand, which is owned by the company called Clarivate Analytics. And impact factor has been so embedded in the tenure process in academia that it's become this essential metric that researchers are sort of required to publish in high impact factor journals. And because of that, we're all publishers and researchers alike are sort of stuck to this metric, even though it's deeply flawed. It's got some real problems, but because it's so embedded in the tenure process and in the evaluation process, the only way to get away from impact factor is if institutions decide to do that. And they don't really have an alternative for evaluating performance and publications. And so unfortunately, institutions have stuck with impact factor as the primary metric. And so publishers and researchers are as well. So my relationship as a publisher with Web of Science is somewhat antagonistic, but because it determines so much of our business. You know, if we come out with an impact factor under 2 for a journal, it's like, geez, we're gonna have a low submission year because the journal has fallen in impact factor. So it drives a lot. It carries a lot of weight, whether it should or not. So more specifically, impact factor, it's something that roughly measures the average citation activity within one journal across a period of 2 years. So it indicates the journal's quality based on the citations that it receives. So this is the actual formula that's used to calculate impact factor. So the 2023 impact factor would mean the number of citations in 2023 to papers published in 21 and 22 divided by the total number of papers published. So it's roughly giving you an idea of the journal's quality based on citations. And as I just said, they are calculated annually by this company, Clarivate Analytics, which is for profit. They sell their journal citation report as a database to libraries and institutions, and that's how they make money. But about impact factor, it is important to understand that not all papers are actually high impact. So, and also not all journals are or should be. So when you're considering your own research and where to submit, you have to be very objective about what impact you think this has. Not that many papers are actually nature quality impact. Those are pretty rare. The majority of papers are more appropriate for an engineering level journal like JBO or like Biomedical Optics Express, which will have impact factors around 3 and 4. So in your field, a journal with an impact factor of 3 or 4 is solid. If you're publishing something that's truly breakthrough, then you might aim for something like Scientific Reports or a higher level Nature journal. But in different fields, those metrics really vary. So if you're working in a clinical area of medicine, those papers are cited quickly and high. So a clinical journal will have a really high impact factor. People who are working in astrophysics, those papers will have often 100 authors on a paper, and they all cite this paper that they were on. And so they have these sort of artificially inflated huge impact factors just because of the size of the author lists. But then fields like astronomical instrumentation, which is the field that's developing things like James Webb Space Telescope, that project was 30 years long, right? So there are highly cited papers that were published 20 years ago. So they've got a lot of citations, but they're outside of this 2-year window. So astronomical instrumentation journals tend to have low impact factors, even though the work is over time very highly cited. So that's just to give you a background about how complicated this metric is, when in fact it will drive a lot that has to do with your career. So yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been want to try to record as much as possible. Yeah, with that, I mean, one of the things that we've been looking at least in our department is, and I've been trying to put it in my more merit and promotion cases, is quartile.
Yeah,
so it goes into your point, like optics has a much lower quartile than cancer might have that. And so there's categories within, for instance, in the Web of Science that you can use, or in the citation reports, where you could then, if a quartile is reported with the journal, that gives some sense of how important. Obviously, it's not a perfect metric, but it gives some sense of how important that journal or that journal is to a given field.
Yeah.
I mean, imperfect, but a little bit better. Like,
yeah, a little bit better
the
than
points
looking
what
at the
you're saying.
number. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
You said like this is owned by it's calculated by Clarivate.
Yeah.
I was curious, like because you mentioned like with astronomical studies and stuff, like it's important to think about like things that are being cited several times over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Like, is there no other factor that they can publish that would also kind of indicate like the longevity of certain things that are being published? Like, I feel like that would also be kind of important and relevant.
Yeah, so Clarivate does also have a 5-year impact factor, and they tried to push that out about 10 years ago based on that criticism that there are fields where 2 years is really not an adequate amount of time to determine impact. So there is a 5-year impact factor that they created to try to address that, but unfortunately nobody uses it. It just hasn't been adopted. Yeah, so it's out there, but yeah.
Yeah, they publish a lot of metrics. I mean, they
They
publish
do,
things
yeah.
like half-life, meaning,
Yeah,
you know, for a given journal, half of the citations are published within, so many years, and the other half,
Yeah,
after
exactly.
that time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data, but yeah.
The
there are a
the
lot of
2-year impact
limitations.
factor is kind of the one
Yeah.
that everyone looks
I
at.
think also from a scientific career point of view, the thing is that, are you concerned about the short game, are you playing the short game or the long game? Because if you're coming out for tenure, you're very early in your career relatively, and you're stuck to the short game. And that means that people who are not expert in your work are going to value work based on the impact factor of the journal. But as your career develops, they don't really care about the impact factor of the journal. They're looking at how well are your papers being cited,
Yeah, exactly.
independent of the impact factor of the journal that they're published in. And so
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I'd say for your career in the immediate future, this number will matter a lot. At Bernard and Vassan's career, it doesn't matter as much. So it becomes less important as you go. But yeah, it's a big deal. There are some other metrics that are worth mentioning. H-index, this is a metric that's owned by Google Scholar. And it measures basically how influential a researcher is by looking at how many papers they published and how often those papers are cited. So this is the formula here, which is a little hard to wrap your head around. But you could say that somebody who has an H-index of 10 means that that researcher has at least 10 papers that have been cited at least 10 times. So if you have an H-index of 40 something, then you've published at least 40 papers that have been cited at least 40 times. So it does do a good job of sort of measuring a person's impact in that way. Alt metrics are alternative metrics, and the alt metrics, this badge is something you'll see on a lot of papers on publisher websites. It was launched as sort of a response to impact factor to say, hey, there are a lot of other ways we can talk about impact other than just this one specific score. And this measures the broader online attention that a paper gets. And so each color in this wheel associates with various different online fingerprints of that article. So it could include Twitter posts, Blue Sky posts, Reddit posts, news sites, blogs, press releases, all the different ways that article appears online aside from just citations. It is important to note that having a high alt metric does not necessarily mean it's a good paper. Some papers get a lot of media attention because they're bad. And so just because it has a high alt metric does not necessarily mean it's a good paper, but it is another way to look more holistically at research. So I think there is this acknowledgement that we all recognize impact factor as flawed. We need to find other ways to talk about impact. And here is yet one more way that we can. Okay, so as the students, you are probably the one who will be doing the submission to a journal. So it's an exciting moment. Your research is done. You're ready to click submit. And then you get to the submission form and it's asking you a whole lot of questions that you had no idea it was going to ask you about. So for those of you who have submitted, I'm curious what your experience was. Were you taken aback by all the things that you were asked on the submission form? Was there anything that surprised you? I'm seeing a lot of blanks. Maybe not?
I have a question as a
Yeah.
season. It's actually quite annoying that I have to retype in my abstract when it's already in my paper.
Right.
And
Right.
I have all the special characters in my abstract, and you have this horrible web page to try.
Yeah.
It's like, why?
Yeah. I can answer that for you afterwards, but at minimum, you should be able to copy and paste it and not retype it. But yeah, I understand it's a pain then to go through all the HTML and capture all the bits. Yeah.
Why can't it be automatically populated?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, especially if it's a Word or a PDF, there's not semantic tagging that the system can recognize to extract your abstract. It's easy with a LaTeX file because it is tagged that way. But if you're not submitting in LaTeX, then it's hard. So, and we get about 25% of LaTeX submissions. So before you begin, and submit to a journal, it is really important to read that journal's author guidelines. They're usually like that long. It's a ton of information, but it's also really essential that you digest it because it's going to have information about what has to be in the paper to be acceptable to that journal. So you do need to have a working knowledge about what's in there. It'll talk about formatting stuff, like does the journal require line numbers or page numbers? Do you have to submit a Word doc or a PDF? But what if you wrote the whole thing in LaTeX and then you get there to submit it and they don't even accept LaTeX and you're like, why did my advisor make me learn to write in LaTeX? So you'll learn all that by checking out the author guidelines. And then know your open access options and mandates. So most journals have, almost all journals, especially in biomedical research, have open access options. You'll be given a whole bunch of different license type and open access choices most of the time. So I'll just review what all those mean. Here we go. All right, so these are the basic types of open access. Gold open access is probably what you'll hear about the most. That means the articles are freely available immediately upon publication and the costs are covered by you, the author, or your institution. So when you publish a gold open access journal article, you pay an article processing fee. And that was the one I mentioned that ranges from $1,500 up to tens of thousands of dollars. The copyright for that article remains with the authors when it's gold open access. You publish under something called Creative Commons, and that means that you retain the rights to reuse and post that article however you want. There's also green open access, which is really important now, especially now that the NIH has mandated this zero embargo deposit on PubMed Central. So this is also known as self-archiving. It means that you as the author can deposit the accepted peer-reviewed version of the manuscript, so your Word doc version, to an institutional repository like PubMed Central. This is often done alongside publishing in a traditional journal. Bronze refers to articles that are freely available on the publisher's website, but still under publisher copyright. So SPIE, for example, if you publish a review article that they're a ton of work, we give you free access for writing a review article, but it stays under SPIE copyright. So anybody can download it, anybody can read it, but it retains copyright with the publisher. And then diamond is what everyone aspires to. It's similar to gold OA, but there's no fees for authors. So the publisher doesn't pay, the author doesn't pay. The costs are covered by either institutions or societies or grants. So it's free for both authors and readers. But of course, somebody has to pay for it somewhere. So this is extremely rare because it's just publishing is expensive. There's a lot involved in infrastructure, in editorial costs. And so finding a third party to cover that is a challenge. Any questions on open access? Yeah.
I have a question because I don't really understand it, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think they were talking about how the government wants everything to be open access now, and I think you touched on it.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for researchers and journals? Like, is that going to change the landscape for that publishing process?
Not for most, especially in the biomedical sciences where open access has been a driving force for quite a while. So I'm trying to think how to explain what it does impact. So if a journal was not open access, if it was behind a paywall and you had to access that journal through a subscribing institution, which is most nature journals until recently, then what happened in the past is that those nature articles would only be available on PubMed Central after what's called an embargo, after usually a 1-year embargo. So that means you could find the abstract on PubMed Central, but if you wanted to cite the whole paper, you had to go to that journal article through the publisher's website. So the change that you're referring to is that embargo has to be removed for any research that's funded by the government or funded by NIH. And so now the full text of a Nature article is on PMC from day one. So from the researcher's point of view, that means everything's easier to find. And so that's good. From a publisher's point of view, it means there's not really any incentive for a library to subscribe to your publication because it's freely available on PubMed Central. And so it's a concern for publishers that were depending on that subscription revenue. It's a concern for them. Yeah.
Other questions?
Okay, so then also if you are publishing with open access, you probably are, then figure out if you qualify for any open access discounts that the journal offers. They can really significantly reduce the cost to publish. SPIE offers a pretty big discount if you're a member. If you're a student member, student membership's like $20 and it saves you like $400 on your open access fee. So it's cost-wise, it really makes sense to do that. So find out in advance if you qualify. And then also find out if your institution has a read and publish deal with that publisher. SPIE has a lot. Most big publishers have a lot of these right now. These are agreements that are rolled into subscription fees for an institution. So for example, the whole University of California system has a read and publish deal with SPIE where the library system pays for subscription access to our closed access journals, and they pay for a certain number of papers to be published with open access. So when you, a researcher, submit a paper to one of our journals, you don't have to deal with any sort of fees or payment. It's just taken care of by the institution. So that information should be clear and available on the publisher's website. It's definitely worth knowing. Because if you can save your research budget for other things and not spend it on publishing fees, that's great. Okay. You're going to be asked for the full list of authors, including names, affiliations, institutional email addresses for all the authors. Nobody in here works in astronomy, but like I said, it's not uncommon to have 50 to 100 authors on a paper. It's a lot, so make sure that you've got all that author information organized on a spreadsheet to make that less painful for you. And you'll also need to know what each author contributed to the paper. So it's becoming increasingly common to have what's called the credit taxonomy on a submission form. And that is where there are 14 predetermined authorship roles that include things like acquiring funding, writing, primary research, all the things. And you'll need to know what each person on your paper did. And that system has been implemented to try to combat the practice of guest or a gift authorship, where it's like, oh, Hassan's a high name researcher. I will put him on my manuscript, even though he only sort of, got a whiff of the paper in passing. So the credit system is intended to try to counteract that sort of activity. So make sure you know what every person on the paper actually did. And then funding. You'll also need to know which authors on the paper have been supported by specific grants. So you'll need to know all the grant numbers and the grant agencies for each author on the paper. And then finally, you will be asked which editor you want to handle your paper. And you might just say, I don't care, and skip that question. But it's a really great opportunity for you to show that you've done your research and that you want to submit to this journal. So it is a good idea to spend some time on the editorial board listing page, going through the names, finding the person who is actually working in your area, and then saying, I want that person to handle my paper. It's very similar to writing a cover letter for a job, and instead of saying to who it may concern, actually finding the name of the person that will be reading your resume, because it shows you've done your work and that you actually do mean to submit to this journal. So worth doing that. Do you have a question? No. Yeah, it was just a twitch. It's fine. Okay, so the process of publishing. These are the various steps that are going on. The things that are in gold are the place where you, the author, are interacting with publishing. All the gray steps are things that are happening in the background. So submission, we just talked about everything that happens there. The journals do vary in transparency about what's going on during submission. So if at any point you're saying, geez, my paper says that it's under contacting reviewers for like 3 weeks, what's going on? You can always just email the journal and ask. There's usually really nice people working behind the scenes who are happy to talk to you about that. So the journal will send you an acknowledgement of your paper. It will go through some degree of screening. It might get sent back to you to fix some things that you missed because maybe you didn't actually read the author guidelines. That might happen a few times. And then it gets assigned to an editor and it goes into review. That is usually what takes the longest amount of time. Review, it is harder and harder to find reviewers for work, for research. Have any of you served as a reviewer on a paper? A few? Good, that's great. Thank you. That's fantastic. It is really hard for journals to get reviewers. People are completely overtaxed. They get dozens of review requests a day. Is that accurate? I mean, a lot. Yeah, a week you get tons, right? So you have to be selective about the ones that you accept to do. It takes time. It's a volunteer activity. You don't get paid for it. so it can just take a really long time to find two people to review a paper. So that is often, if a paper feels like it's just sitting, that is often why. The journal is desperately contacting a dozen or more people trying to get somebody to say, yes, they'll review the paper. Then you'll receive a decision, which is, we'll get into in a little bit. It's probably going to be a revision decision. And then ideally, you'll revise it, it'll be accepted, and then it'll go into production where you will have to review a proof of the paper before it's published. So that is basically the overview. There, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But basically, you ended up figuring regarding the two previous slides.
Yeah.
The last part, the previous one, yeah, when you can request for a certain editor to
Yeah.
review your paper or not. So I tried doing that a couple of times. I don't know if I was successful at all or not. So I don't know who takes the decision of sending your paper to a certain reviewer or to a certain editor, board editor or not, and how much attention they pay to that. So.
Well, Vasan is a senior editor for JBO, so you see that information on an author submission. How much weight do you give that?
I pay attention to it, certainly. Sometimes they mention a person who's actually also a senior editor, and so they're not actually at the level that manages identification of reviewers. If that person is available, so we also see all the other editors and how many manuscripts they're currently managing. And so sometimes if a person's really popular, they're already managing 4 manuscripts and there are others that are not managing 1 or managing none, and they're in a related area. So we're also recommend being the editor-in-chief tells us, please try to distribute the load across all of the editors as much as you can. So
Yeah, that's a good
definitely
point.
pay attention and we'll honor that request if possible, but that's not always possible. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay. Did you have a question on this one?
Maybe later.
Okay. Okay, cool. So there are 3 common types of peer review. The most common is what's called single anonymous, and that means that the reviewers see the names of the authors on the paper, but the authors do not know the names of the reviewers. This is the traditional, it's the most widely used type of peer review. Some journals do use double anonymous, and that means that the reviewers also don't know the identity of the authors. That is primarily done to reduce bias and increase objectivity. It mostly works to overcome, I'm blanking on the term, positivity bias, I guess. So when a well-known name is on a paper and a reviewer sees that, they're more likely to review it positively than if it's an unknown name. So double anonymous kind of works to overcome that. It is, however, a pain. It's hard for the publisher. It's a pain for the author. So just because of the difficulty of stripping metadata out of papers and making sure that everybody's blind to one another, not that many journals use it. And then there's open review, which is has some kind of growing momentum behind it. And that is where the reviewers and the authors both know each other's identity. And sometimes the review is even published alongside the paper. The most well-known journal that uses this is called eLife. This has pros and cons. A lot of reviewers say, yeah, I really don't want my research published, and I don't want my identity known to the author. The reason being, you said you'd reviewed before, is that right? No, who had reviewed? You'd reviewed, yes. So if you were reviewing a paper, if you were reviewing Bernard's paper, and you had something critical to say about it, would you want him to know? You would not. And so that's one of the reasons why people prefer single anonymous, is that they feel like, oh gosh, this person is above me. I don't want them to know that I said something critical. Yeah. Yeah, so there's some good reasons why single anonymous has kind of stayed the most popular. Were you going to add something?
Yeah, I just remember when I was a PhD student, I worked in a lab with a lot of researchers, and apparently in the Netherlands, there's this tradition of people signing their reviews.
Interesting.
I think especially in the old optics community. So I remember I got a review for one of my papers and it was signed, but even though the journal was anonymous peer review. And so it's interesting because if you're forced to sign your name, it also means that you kind of have to be honest, right? And that it kind of reduces, you can't just make nasty comments,
Right.
right? So it goes both ways.
It does.
In some sense, it's that if you have to divulge, then
It humanizes the process a lot.
humanizes the process a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are good arguments for and against. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I should even ask this question, but, and I think maybe I know the answer, but I would maybe like to hear your point. You said that there, there's difficulty in even finding reviewers. Why is it still like volunteer based? Is there like, why don't we have an incentive behind it? Is it just due to tradition or like, yeah, more honor based? I'm just kind of curious, like, yeah, maybe a little bit more. Why?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big question. There's a lot of researchers saying like, why do I spend hours on this and I don't get paid to do this? And I think it really just comes down to expense. That if reviewers were compensated in some way, then then the cost to publish would be higher. So subscription costs would have to increase, and libraries would drop subscriptions, or open access fees would have to increase to cover that by quite a bit. So that's the main reason. It's just expense. Most journals, especially scholarly publishers that have low open access fees, our financial goal is zero. We want to break even. And so any added expense like paying a reviewer or adding a new AI tool to our submission system is a cost that somehow we have to absorb. And they're all expensive. All tools that publishers use are in the order of tens of thousands of dollars. And so that has to come in somewhere. And so that's the main reason, is that everybody feels squeezed, and so there's just no money left over to pay reviewers. There are some journals that are experimenting with things like a credit system, like, okay, you do 10 reviews for us, and then you get a free open access waiver for a journal. So that's sort of non-monetary incentive systems that some publishers are working on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just almost feel different. I mean, I hear that, like, for sure, it can be more expensive, but then I think, like, already so expensive to publish.
Yeah.
And, like, open access, like, okay, well, what would it be the difference between like 1,500 or 1,600? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
I'm not
Doesn't
sure
matter,
what the
yeah.
difference would be, but like when the entry point is already so high. It's
Right.
okay. I didn't know that was a reason.
Yeah.
Do they give them anything like, oh, you can, if you review for us at SPIE, you can go to the conferences for free or something? Is there any benefit at all?
No, nope. It's purely volunteer based. Yeah, yeah. And most publishers, that's the case. But yeah, we're all looking at ways to incentivize reviewers, because it is hard. But then you get into this issue of quality. Like, it's not so much an issue in JBO and biophotonics discovery, but we have an electronic imaging journal that's basically a computer science journal, and we get reviews that are 4 lines long that say like, improve your introduction, add some more references. Like, okay, well, does that person get a credit for that review? That wasn't helpful at all. So then you end up in this arbitrating place where, like, well, okay, what is a good enough review to justify getting credit, what isn't? And so there's not a great answer, but it is widely acknowledged that it's an issue. Reviewers need to be incentivized in some way, because all journals are hurting, and the volume of research is just increasing so rapidly that there just aren't enough people to help. Yeah, Shilpita.
Yeah, I was wondering why double anonymous isn't more widely used. Like, I guess to me, it seems like the most, like, biasless.
Yeah.
Is it just because, like, if reviewers don't know the identity of the authors, they're less likely to accept the review? Like,
I think that is part of it.
okay.
I think that is part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And do you have any opinions on this? I remember about double versus single anonymous.
From a practical perspective, I just have to imagine it's really hard to anonymize who
It
the
is.
authors are.
It is very hard to anonymize.
I mean, just
the
thinking
authors.
about like all
Yeah.
the times people use we or that, like previous work from our group. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
you would
exactly.
have to basically strip that out of in the submission process. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, because it's not just the author names, it's also in the acknowledgements. It'll mention the people's names again in the funding. Often they cite themselves, you'll have your own paper cited. So it's really hard to completely anonymize a paper. So I think that is one of the main reasons.
I mean, I remember when I looked at my tenure letters and they're redacted. I could figure out every single person. So it wasn't, it was, without too much effort. Or I'm pretty sure I knew every single person.
Yeah.
So I think redacting is on the, like, who the authors actually are, I think is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so regarding the possible compensation or not for reviewers, I understand how cost could translate to the final cost of the publication, let's say. But I also know some cases from other publishers that provide like reviewer rewards to the reviewers, like having a discount in the next publication
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you do this in any of the journals from SPIE.
SPIE has not done that, but we hope to soon. So
Mhm.
it really comes down to a technology issue that the submission and peer review systems are very complicated pieces of software. And there are vendors, there are tools that is their whole tool package is submission and peer review systems. Most publishers use those, but that means they're not actually integrated with our customer databases.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very difficult to take all the information from this system and then track it in this one to make those discounts happen. And that's been our problem. We just built a new in-house submission system. And so that's something we're hoping to do in the next couple of years. Yeah. I do need to move on because we actually, I have a lot of stuff still to talk about. So, okay, so pop quiz. Who decides if your paper will be published? This had a cool stamp icon that didn't come through, but all right. Do you think it is? If you think it's the reviewers, raise your hand. Okay, if you think it is the editor or associate editor, raise your hand. If you think it's the editor-in-chief, raise your hand. Okay, if you think it is journal staff, raise your hand. If you think it is your boss or advisor. Good, okay. Oh, I think everybody, there were a lot of this. There were a lot of that, yeah. Okay. So it is the peer reviewers. All right, well, I'll just jump into actual roles here. The answer is it is the associate editor who ultimately accepts your paper. So this is the tree of basically who's handling a journal. So technical oversight, you've got at the top the editor-in-chief. At Biophotonics Discovery, Darren Rolbier at Boston U is the editor-in-chief of that SPIE journal. So underneath that, you've got various editors. You've got topical editors, you've got associate editors. Those are the people who are actually handling papers. They assign reviewers, usually a minimum of 2. The reviewer's job is to read the paper in great detail, give detailed technical feedback, and to advise the editor about what they think should happen. It is very common for one reviewer to come back and say, this is great, you should publish this, and the other reviewer to say, absolutely not, reject. So it is the editor's job to read those reviews and make a judgment call about the outcome of that paper. So ultimately, it is this person who might consult with the editor-in-chief if they need help, but for the most part, it's the associate editor who actually makes a decision about the paper.
But Gwen, isn't it true that the editor-in-chief typically is the person who assigns a topical editor or associate editor?
Yes.
And sometimes after them reading the title and the abstract, they say, this is not right for our
Yep.
journal, we just reject.
Yes.
So it doesn't even enter the process.
Yes. Yes, that does happen a lot. We call that desk reject. So if you haven't done your research very well and you've picked the wrong scope, wrong journal scope, then that will happen. You can get a desk reject for scope or for quality. I mean, I don't expect any of you to ever have that problem, but we do get a lot of papers that are just not novel or not significant enough, and so they get desk rejected without peer review for that reason. And then on the administrative side, this is my team. We've got a bunch of people in Bellingham, Washington, who are the people who are sending you emails, responding to emails. They're the ones who liaise between you and the journal editors. They do the screening to make sure that the paper contains all the information it should. They do ethical screening to make sure there's no ethical violations in the paper. And they will vet that reviewers and authors are who they say they are. So that's what my team does. Okay, so don't be upset if your first decision is for revision, maybe a major revision, accepted papers almost always go through some round of revision. It's not a black mark to get a revision decision. It's very standard. Think of reviews as constructive feedback. They're an opportunity to make your paper better. Try to be grateful for that opportunity, even though it may not feel that way when you get that decision. Hopefully, the reviewers have been really thorough and objective, but that's not always the case. So if your review is really brief or harsh or vague, don't take it personally. Bernard, have you ever received a review that was really critical and made you question your career?
Like the second paper I published was, I mean, it was a hard copy and it was bleeding red.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And somebody looked at it and said, "Oh, this person." They knew exactly what it looked like.
Yep. Yeah. So hopefully it's not your comments aren't bleeding red, but if that's the case, try to step back and take a breath. And remember, again, volunteering reviewing is a volunteer job. It doesn't get you tenure or promotions or anything. Yeah, they're doing the best they can. So have some patience with them. But when you get that request for revision, the first thing you should do is read what the editor says before you read the reviews. Because as I mentioned, the editor is the arbiter of those reviewers. And so whatever the editor says about your paper, that's the feedback you need to follow. So make sure that you know what the editor wants from your revision first, then take all the reviewer feedback into consideration. You don't have to do everything the reviewers say. Sometimes they'll have conflicting advice. So the important thing is that if you choose not to do something that a reviewer has told you to do, you should say so in your response to reviewer letter, which is going to be submitted with your revision. So if you decide not to, say, I didn't do this because, make it clear that you weren't just ignoring it. So write your response to the reviewers, be as objective and cool-headed as you possibly can be. By the time you're writing that letter, many weeks will have passed since you got your revision decision. Highlight the changes you made in your manuscript so that it's really clear to the editor what you changed. And then make sure you submit the revision by the deadline. If you don't, communicate with the office and let them know that you need an extension. That's usually not a big deal. So let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Okay, are there any other questions about peer review or the reviewer feedback process? Yeah.
You said you had to write a response to
Yeah.
reviewers. Oh, sorry. When you write a response, are you sending out an email back to the reviewers, or is it just kind of responding to the comments on the paper?
It's basically a cover letter for the revision. So it's a separate document that you'll have to upload at the revision stage. It's usually a PDF that is in letter format saying, I addressed these concerns in the following ways.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you just tell them what you did and
Yep.
what you didn't do.
Yep, exactly.
What if you don't agree with the reviewer?
Yeah, if you don't agree, then this is your opportunity to say why. So ultimately, for the most part, it usually just goes back to the associate editor. So if you make a good case for why you disagree with the reviewer, your audience is the associate editor. Occasionally, a paper will go back to re-review, and we usually try to get the same reviewers to look at it again. So if that's the case and you disagree, there could be a friction point there. But again, it's the editor who makes the decision. So make your case about why you disagreed to that person.
Yeah, along those lines, I guess wearing the associate editor's hat, you want when the response reviewers comes back, you want it to just go to the associate editor and make it as easy as possible for that person to be able to make the decision on that spot versus having to send it off for re-review. You don't want to make it so it's iffy.
Mm-hmm.
So me personally, I mean, I don't know if probably some associate editors would disagree. I like when people actually, they say, for comment number 4, we agree with the reviewers, we did X, Y, and Z, and then they actually put either the figure or they put the revised figure or they put the revised text right there. I personally like that because then I actually see the change, right? And I can and if it looks all reasonable and then I look at, just flip through the manuscript, then to me, it's very easy for me to make that decision.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, just to add to that, also speaking as an associate editor, it's really important that you actually itemize every individual comment that each reviewer made, say a few sentences of whether you agree or disagree. So that's the response, just in an informal way, and then the action you took. And if you disagree and you say no action was taken, write down no action was taken based on my response, or this was the action taken. And yes, if there's an excerpt from the text that you could just cut and paste it right there, or put the revised figure right there. So it goes a long way to the associate editor. We feel you've been diligent in looking at every single major comment, and that you've thought about it, you have a response that is the basis for what you've decided to do.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's perfect. It's your paper. So if you disagree and you really feel that this is not appropriate, then it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should feel empowered to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so you might also get rejected. I really hope this doesn't happen on your very first paper. It could. It will happen at some point in time. Your paper will be rejected. So first, just acknowledge and process. It can be emotional. So just take a breath, go for a walk. Try not to, don't take any action right away. Just walk away from it for a minute. Don't take it personally. That is part of the publishing process. Once you've taken a breather, try to really understand the reason. Maybe it wasn't really a good scope fit for the journal. Maybe there were some fundamental flaws in the methodology or analysis. Maybe it just really wasn't novel enough for the journal that you chose to submit it to, even though it was within scope. So try to really understand the reasons for rejection, and then figure out actionable feedback. So even when a paper is rejected, there's almost always some constructive criticism that comes, it's already been through review usually. So there'll be reviewer comments, even though it's rejected. Take that under consideration. Treat it like a revision. Even if you're not going to submit it back to that journal, take that feedback into account. This is a great opportunity for you to make improvements and make it better. If you decide to then submit it to a different journal after you make those changes, it's a fairly small community. There is a reasonable chance the same reviewer is going to get assigned to it at a different journal than reviewed it the first time. If they get the same paper and say, I just saw this 6 weeks ago and it hasn't changed, you're going to get rejected again. So take those reviews into consideration, make changes, make improvements before you submit it to another journal. Yeah.
If you already paid the fees, like the 500 or 1,000 fees that you paid for the submission, it gets rejected, you still like, do they still take your money, or?
Yeah, they're not submission fees. They're those are publication fees.
So you pay after
it's accepted.
Okay. So there's like 2 separate fees, like before.
There's no fee before.
Oh,
it's free to submit. So yeah, you can submit the same paper to 10 journals if you need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your paper can get rejected at different steps, right? So what are all the steps that you could get rejected at other than after peer review?
Okay, so shortly after submission, the associate editor reviews it, makes a determination about scope and general quality. It could get rejected there. It shouldn't if you've written a good paper and you've done your research about the journal. And then it can be rejected after the first round of peer review. And then you can submit a revision, and very rarely, but it does happen, it could be rejected after you revise the paper. And that's usually a situation where you haven't adequately addressed the reviewer's concerns, or some other odd fringe case has come up to make it no longer suitable. So those are basically the 3 stages that you might get rejected. Yeah. Okay. But in the happy scenario that you're accepted, that's great. So what happens next? Give your friends a high five, go have a drink, call your mom, do whatever you want to do. That's awesome. The first thing that's going to happen is your paper is going to get sent to a company that does journal publishing and typesetting. A lot of journals actually do copy editing, have a real human who does copy editing. Increasingly few now, because Gen AI does a really good job at that. So I think that this is something we'll start to see less of. Currently, SPIE still has real humans who read all of our accepted papers and do copy editing. The journal will make some small changes. They'll apply a layout template. Try not to be too wedded to those little changes that get made. If your meaning is changed or if an error is introduced, by all means, you should say something, but try not to get too bent out of shape if little wording changes are made. Just let it go. So then you'll be sent proofs, and this isn't proofs in the geometry sense. This is you'll be given what used to be called a red line, a PDF. What'd you say? Galleys. A galleys, yeah, galley red line proofs, same thing. So we used to physically, the beginning of my career, 17 years ago, we FedExed manuscripts to authors with handwritten changes. you now get an email with a PDF attached. So it'll have a bunch of questions for you on the proof, usually a lot of questions about missing reference information that you have to fill in, maybe some questions about equations that are unclear or brackets or fencing that needs to be fixed. You'll usually be given a really quick turnaround, like 24 to 48 hours to do those corrections. So once you give those corrections, most journals publish article at a time, which means that at the point that you say this is approved to be published, it'll be published within a couple of days in the journal of choice. After it's published, it gets sent to the third-party indexers that we talked about, Web of Science, PubMed, Scopus. At that point, those are sent by the publisher via a feed to those indexers. It's out of the publisher's hand at that point. So we often get emails from people saying, hey, my paper's not in Web of Science yet. Do you know what's going on? We say, I'm so sorry. I really don't. You have to contact them. So once the publisher publishes it, it's up to them how quickly it gets posted online. And then share and promote that. I'm going to talk a lot more about that this afternoon. This is a step that I think a lot of people skip over because they're just eager to get on to the next thing by the time that their paper is actually published. But this is a really important step that is worth your time to spend a few hours working on the sharing and promotion of that published article. Okay, just in time, 30 minutes left. Before I move on, any questions about the publishing process before we dive into ethics? Yeah.
So when you get rejected, when you get rejected, can you email them back asking any questions about it?
You can. So usually, if you really think that it was an unfair rejection, that either maybe the problems could have been addressed if you could just do one more revision, or that there was some bias in the review, or like maybe you suspect there was a conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed, you can enter an appeals process. And that's an email to the editor that says, I'd like to open an appeal for the following reason, and please reconsider my paper based on the following. So there is an avenue to argue.
Is there a max number of revision rounds that paper can go through?
Technically, no, but most journals try to stick to one major revision and then at most one minor revision to fix small things. I'd say 2 is typical. Beyond that is pretty unusual. Yeah. Okay, ethics. How many of you have had training in research ethics? I hope to see everybody's hand. Okay. Did that include any degree of publication ethics training? A little bit, maybe. What topics touched on publication? I'm curious for the 2 of you who did that.
Conflict of interest.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, that is an element of it. It's a lot more than that, unfortunately. Publication ethics are a huge issue in scholarly publishing right now. Huge. Paper mills are really rampant. In the past 5 years, it's become apparent that systematic manipulation of the publication process has resulted in some really large-scale publication of fraudulent papers. This fraud is primarily perpetrated by groups called paper mills, which are for-profit entities that produce fake or really poor quality research at scale for publication in journals. So in 2023, over 10,000 papers were retracted from the scholarly record that were mostly due to paper mill activity. So this is a type of trouble you would have to go looking for. I don't expect any of you to have issues with paper mills, but you might be aggressively contacted by a publishing group saying, hey, I've got this paper that just needs a 4th author. You want to be on it? No, don't even respond to that. That is somebody who is practicing authorship for sale. It's a huge ethical violation to practice purchasing authorship. Authorship for sale often goes hand in hand with paper mills. That's when a paper mill produces a paper. It's really low quality. It might be made up entirely, but it looks and it smells like a paper. And then they sell authorship spots on that paper to people. There are Facebook groups with up to hundreds of thousands of members that are selling author roles. So you can see This one's got 110,000 members. It's called Scopus, Web of Science publication. Those are posts that contain articles for sale. They usually link to WhatsApp groups or Telegram channels Telegraph, what's it called? Yeah. Groups where the transaction actually takes place. So I can't overstate how huge this problem is. Hundreds of thousands of articles are being sold via these channels. So it's terrible for publishing. It's terrible for the scientific record. You should be aware that this is going on once you get into the editing end of things and you're actually working on a journal. It becomes more of an issue because you really have to be tuned into this issue because these paper mills produce articles that really do look like papers and they can be hard to tell the difference. So don't get yourself into a situation where you are involved in authorship for sale. It's a career ender. Plagiarism. Okay, plagiarism is something that can happen by accident. I'm sure you all know what it is. It's when you're duplicating text and you don't cite it. You can avoid this by just never copying and pasting from another article. You can reword it. Put it in your own words, right? Just don't do any degree of text copying and pasting. All publishers use text duplication software called Authenticate, and it will pick up 3 words that match to another paper. It picks up very small bits and phrases, so be really careful. And anytime you're using another article, just make sure that you cite it. So depending on the size of the block that you copied, your paper could be rejected. If it's a really big block that you copied, you could end up being sanctioned from ever submitting to that journal again. So plagiarism does happen on accident all the time, most especially with students. So be really, really careful that you're not copying and pasting text from one of your sources. Yeah.
What about let's say you have like a conference proceeding and you put a figure and you have like a caption.
Yeah.
And you're trying to make an actual paper, you're publishing a paper and you put the same figure, the same caption. Is that still plagiarism because you're copying your own work? Does that still count? Or do you have to reword the whole caption too?
You can reuse your figure, cite the paper, make it clear that it's coming from that, be transparent. Don't try, it's trying to disguise that progeny that gets you into trouble. So cite that it came from there. It's best if you can reword the caption. But most publishers don't consider that dual publication. You want to, I'd say change as much as possible. You don't generally want to submit the same text exactly from your proceedings paper to a journal.
Okay.
Yeah, but
because there's a lot of similarities too. When you have your proceedings, you've already written everything out.
Yeah,
and then you have to like rewrite everything, even though it's the same thing, and then add on whatever you have.
Yeah. SPIE journals does not consider that double publication. So we really encourage people to take their proceedings paper, beef it up. I mean, a proceedings paper is rarely robust enough to be a journal paper, fill it out and then submit that. So there could be, 30% overlap, and that is fine. We'll see that on the Authenticate report, and we'll say, oh, look, that was cited. That was their SPIE proceedings paper. No problem.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. So plagiarism. Yeah, that's a bad one. Okay, predatory journals. Ooh. All right, these are open access, for-profit journals. Take a really hard look at emails soliciting authorship. You'll probably get some. You might get some from a publisher saying, hey, I saw that you published a paper or you presented a paper at Photonics West on this topic. You should really submit it to this journal. If you're getting chased hard by a journal, you should vet that journal really carefully. Because it could just be, maybe it's SPIE saying, hey, you presented a paper at an SPIE conference, submit it to an SPIE journal. We're legit, I promise, but you might also be getting pursued by a predatory journal, and it can be hard to know the difference. A predatory journal will be very flattering. They'll tell you that you're amazing. They'll try to get you to publish your work. There will be a cost involved. If you are not sure if this journal is predatory or not, there is a website called Think, Check, Submit. Go through this little checklist. Do your colleagues know about the journal? Talk to your advisor. Ask them if they've heard of it. If they haven't, step away. Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? If the publisher's contact email address is a Gmail address, also not a good sign. They should have an institutional email address. Is the journal really clear about the type of peer review it uses? There should be very clear author and peer review information on that journal's website. Is that journal indexed and archived in dedicated services like PubMed and Web of Science? If not, probably not a good sign. Is it clear upfront what fees will be charged? If there's a submission fee, you were asking about submission fees, that is not done in our field. So if there is a submission fee, they're not legitimate. And are there really clear guidelines for authors that should have information about publication policies, copyright, information about conflict of interest, things like that. So verify, anytime you're pursued by a journal, really verify that it is a legitimate journal, because if you accidentally publish in a predatory journal, it can be a really black mark on your CV. It's not something that you want to see.
I know there's been a lot of debate and controversy about MDPI and frontiers.
Yeah.
What's the current thinking in the publishing community about those two journals?
Yeah. I consider them predatory publishers. I do. They are huge. The MDPI is new in the past 10 years, and they are one of the largest scholarly publishers out there now because they're so aggressive about pursuing authors, publishing special sections. Anybody who raises their hand can guest edit a special section for MDPI. So they publish a high volume of research. It is minimally or not at all peer reviewed. And they're in it for the profit, right? It's an open access journal, so you have to pay to publish. And so they're about volume, quantity, not quality. However, MDPI has been in it long enough to have a few journals that have become, I don't want to say reputable, but have actually gotten decent impact factors and are starting to be places that some communities think are acceptable to publish. I don't encourage it. Yeah. I know there are some institutions in Europe that say if you've got an MDPI publication, like don't publish. You'll get in trouble for publishing an MDPI. So yeah, so they're kind of on this borderline between legitimate, non-legitimate. Okay, and then conflict of interest. You brought that up already. Just make sure that you disclose any financial or personal relationships that could be perceived as influencing your research, authorship, or the peer review process. Just disclose. If you had an internship at a company that makes an instrument that you used on this project, just disclose it. It's really only going to be a problem if you don't disclose it. So err on the side of disclosure. Data fabrication. This doesn't happen by accident. Don't do it. Just a couple of years ago, Mark Tessier-Levine, who is an internationally renowned neuroscientist, resigned as president of Stanford after an investigation determined that he had failed to correct some errors in some old scientific papers, and also that he had a lot of instances of manipulated data in his papers. Real sad. Don't do it. This is avoidable by just not doing that. Okay, duplicate submission. This is something I think surprises people, that this is actually an ethical violation, because if it takes so long to get published, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Why don't I just submit my paper to 5 different journals at once and just whichever one accepts it first, I publish it? Well, the reason is that, as we discussed, reviewers are a resource, and they are a precious resource. So for every paper that is submitted to a journal, we contact usually a dozen or more reviewers to try to get somebody to review your paper. If you've submitted that to 5 journals, then that is 60 people who have been contacted to review your paper, and you're drawing all those resources for your 5 submissions. So duplicate submission is a publication ethical violation that can lead to sanctions. It's very serious. So you can only submit to 1 journal at a time. And then authorship disputes. These can happen on accident. Make sure that you are really clear about the order of authors on your paper and who is included as an author and who is not included. Every person on your paper needs to agree. We run into this a lot as publishers. We'll have somebody come back to us 3 years after an article is published and say, hey, I was a postdoc when that project was being worked on, and my name's not on that paper. Why not? And we say, you've got to, unfortunately, you need to talk to your institution or talk to your group at that point. It can burn a lot of bridges, so just be really careful to make sure everybody agrees about the authorship list on your paper. That is publication ethics. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes. What else can I tell you about scholarly publishing? Yeah.
About having a proceeding and then publishing a paper.
Yeah.
So we publish, let's say, a proceeding in Photonic West, and then we decide to go with a different journal, like completely different, not SPIE. Is that still an okay thing to do? This has been like a question for our group for quite a while.
Yeah. You mean, is it okay then?
Yeah.
So then you need to look at the destination publisher of your choice. So if you're submitting something that you presented at Photonics West to Optica, you need to check the Biomedical Optics Express author guidelines and make sure that they're okay with it. So it's ultimately the one that you're submitting to are the guidelines you need to follow. Yeah.
Regarding data fabrication.
Yeah.
So I usually edit a lot of my pictures that I take from microscopes, like contrast, bright, sometimes like fixing the color and for color that's captured from the camera. How, like, to what extent can you do that and like for it to count as data fabrication?
That's a question for these guys. I'm not sure.
I mean, my understanding is that if you do a adjustment to the image globally, it is not considered fabrication. It's when you actually, do a adjustment alteration only on subregions that make it look differently relative to other elements. That's what constitutes
That's a good answer.
fabrication. But if you're doing a global contrast adjustment or color adjustment, then I think it's fine because you're not misrepresenting the relative appearance of the thing in the entire frame. At least that's my understanding. But I think you're much more well-versed in image processing than I am. So
No, I'm trying to think if there's a one-size-fits-all rule I would give. Because obviously, there's just a picture of a setup, right? Which if you manipulate the color there, if I'm worried that I'm going to say something that's going to be like somebody's gonna be able to find the one case of, but what if you did this instead? And it'll probably be like, oh, so.
You have texture in some part of the image, but then you make it completely bright, so you obscure that texture exists. So if you're essentially hiding a feature through an alteration, then that can be considered data.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of AI tools now too, and like Lightroom and where you can improve the resolution. There's like all of these things that are available now. And I think it's okay to mention that you're done with Congress.
Yeah, I think that if you describe as much as possible and if you standardize as much as possible, then I'm not saying that still couldn't fall under data fabrication because like I said, there's probably exceptions to any rule, but yeah, the more you describe in the text, the better. And if seems so like pedantic or so like, you're writing like 2 paragraphs on this, maybe it's a supplemental thing you put in. I don't want to say it's a case by case basis, but I think that I don't know if I could give just a general blanket answer to that.
Disclose. That's
Yeah.
the main thing. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? I am going to just pop this up here. This is a really great article about how to write a scholarly paper. It's worth scanning this QR code. Andrea Armani wrote this a couple years ago. It's got a really good outline for just how to go about it. So I'll just pop that up for your phones. And I brought t-shirts for all of you. They're really rad, so I'm going to pass those around too. Okay, there's my contact details. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Those are a couple websites that are really interesting sites about publication ethics. Oh yeah, thanks. Pubpeer.com. It's like a wiki site for finding publication fraud. So there's people commenting on errors on papers. Retractionwatch.org is a database of every paper that's been retracted, every hundreds of thousands of papers. So there's some cool stuff. All right. So coming around first. Thank you. All right, Excel's coming around first, and then, all right. Oh, I should show you how cool these are. All right, large is coming around next. Let me just show you how rad this is. Okay. All right, so here's our 3 biomedical journals: Journal of Biomedical Optics, Biophotonics Discovery, Neurophotonics. This rad biophotonics background. Pretty cool, right? I know, I love it. I wear mine all the time. All right, so large is there, pass those around. Let's see. I think these are mediums. Yeah, mediums there.
We will say that previous versions of the short course have not gotten a feature bonus, so you are.
Okay, awesome.
Just pass it around.
All right, and then small is coming around there. There we go. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Jody, come on.